There are clear signs of deception threaded through every action John and Patsy Ramsey took that fateful morning, behaviors that screamed inconsistency amid the supposed panic of their daughter's vanishing. Their roles as grief-stricken parents appeared almost flawless on the surface. Patsy clutching the ransom note in her unchanged party clothes from the night before, John calmly directing the chaos. But it was as if they overlooked crucial elements to truly sell the performance, like the raw, instinctive cries most moms and dads would unleash while desperately searching every corner for their child. Instead, their moves felt rehearsed, designed to steer suspicion away from the dark secrets possibly hidden within their own walls. Below are 3 shocking clues we all missed that unravel this haunting puzzle. What if those subtle slips were the threads pulling apart a meticulously woven cover-up? Could spotting them sooner have unlocked the truth we've chased for decades? 1. They forgot the last time they saw her. The biggest clue that clearly demonstrates the contradiction in the statements of John and Patsy is their vague and inconsistent recollection of the last time they saw JonBenét alive. They repeatedly claimed that the child was fast asleep in the car on the way home from the Christmas party, insisting she remained unconscious as they carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed without her stirring. But why would parents, especially ones as attentive as they portrayed themselves to be, fail to provide any specific details about her final moments awake? What was she doing in her room that evening, playing with her new toys, perhaps chatting about the holiday festivities, or simply winding down? Their accounts lacked these vivid particulars, reducing the narrative to a bland assertion that she slept through it all, which raises immediate red flags about the authenticity of their memory. This vagueness isn't just a minor lapse, it points to a deeper inconsistency in how they described that critical time frame. Patsy mentioned in interviews that she only glanced at JonBenét's room briefly, but she couldn't specify what the girl was engaged in at that moment, whether she was under the covers, holding a stuffed animal, or even if the lights were on. John echoed this ambiguity, offering no additional insights into her activities, as if the evening blurred into an unremarkable haze. How could such pivotal details escape them, particularly when every second of that night has been scrutinized for years? If they were truly innocent and grieving, wouldn't the image of their daughter's last living moments be etched in their minds with crystal clarity, down to the smallest gesture or word? Instead, their statements feel rehearsed and stripped of personal touches, almost as if they're avoiding specifics that might unravel under closer examination. The contradiction becomes even more glaring when considering the forensic evidence that directly challenges their timeline. Autopsy results revealed undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, indicating she had eaten the fruit roughly 1 to 2 hours before her death, well after the family returned home. Yet John and Patsy denied giving her any such snack, and their accounts make no mention of her being awake or active enough to consume it on her own. This discrepancy forces us to question, if she was supposedly asleep from the car ride onward, how did this food end up in her system? Were they withholding information about her being up and about, perhaps interacting with family members in ways they didn't want to disclose? The absence of any explanation for this detail undermines their insistence on her uninterrupted slumber, suggesting a deliberate omission to align their story with an intruder theory. Beyond the physical evidence, the lack of detail about JonBenét's room activities that night amplifies the suspicion. Patsy couldn't recall if she helped change her daughter into pajamas or if JonBenét did it herself, a routine task that should stand out in hindsight. John similarly offered nothing about checking on her or noticing anything unusual in her space. No toys scattered from holiday excitement, no books left open, nothing to paint a picture of a child's typical evening. Why this selective amnesia? If the last sighting was as mundane as they claim, wouldn't they volunteer more to humanize the tragedy and affirm their innocence? Their reticence invites speculation. Perhaps the truth involves events they couldn't risk revealing, like a late-night disturbance or family dynamics that deviated from the perfect image they projected. Specifically, the clearest problem of John and Patsy's statement is their inconsistent description of the state of the bedroom door, whether it was closed or ajar. In the 1998 documentary interview, Patsy explicitly stated that she glanced at the door and noted it was closed, only to immediately correct herself by saying, I always left it ajar." This self-interruption reveals a moment of hesitation, as if she were adjusting her narrative on the fly. Why would such a simple detail about a door require an instant revision? If the door was truly ajar as per her usual habit, why start with closed at all? This slip-up isn't just a verbal stumble. It underscores a potential effort to align her recollection with a preferred storyline, raising questions about whether the memory was genuine or reconstructed to fit certain assumptions. Patsy's account ties directly into the broader timeline of that morning, where she described descending the stairs and spotting the ransom note. but her wavering on the door's position adds layers of doubt. She emphasized that leaving the door ajar was her routine, implying normalcy in the household. Yet the initial mention of it being closed suggests something out of the ordinary might have occurred. How does this inconsistency affect the credibility of her glance into the room? If the door was closed, wouldn't that prompt a more thorough check, especially upon realizing the child wasn't immediately visible? Conversely, if it was ajar, why not describe peering inside more clearly, perhaps noting the bed's state or any signs of disturbance? The correction feels like a pivot, possibly to downplay any implication that access to the room was restricted, which could complicate explanations for how events unfolded. John's role in this detail further amplifies the contradiction, as he doesn't directly challenge or elaborate on Patsy's version. In various statements, he aligns with her overall narrative without adding specifics about the door, essentially deferring to her recollection. But why remain silent on such a pivotal element when it could corroborate or clarify the sequence? If he had passed by the room earlier or checked it himself, wouldn't he offer his own observation to strengthen their joint account? His lack of input creates a vacuum, making the couple's statements appear coordinated yet incomplete. Critics have wondered if this harmony masks deeper discrepancies, where one partner's uncertainty isn't probed by the other, suggesting a unified front rather than independent memories. It's clear that John and Patsy were never certain JonBenét was in her bedroom on Christmas night, or worse, they knew from the very start that she wasn't there, and had to lie to cover it up. So where was JonBenét? The answer most widely accepted that she was with Burke that night. Burke Ramsey's own statements provide intriguing insights into the possibility that he and his sister were together during the late hours of that Christmas night. In interviews conducted years later, including one with Dr. Phil in 2016, Burke admitted that after the family had gone to bed, he woke up and ventured downstairs alone. He described this as a time when he decided to play with some of his new toys, suggesting he was active in the lower levels of the house, while others were presumably asleep. This admission places him in areas of the home where interactions could easily occur, especially if JonBenét had also stirred from her rest. The house layout, with shared common spaces like the living areas and basement access, would have made it simple for the siblings to cross paths during such a nocturnal excursion. Burke's recollection of this solo activity downstairs aligns with scenarios where a younger sibling might join in, drawn by the sounds or lights of play in the quiet of the night. Furthermore, his initial claims of sleeping through the entire evening evolved over time, introducing inconsistencies that prompt questions about what else might have transpired in those unguarded moments. The enhanced audio from the 911 call made by Patsy Ramsey early the next morning adds another layer to this narrative. Forensic audio analysis revealed what sounded like a young boy's voice in the background, uttering words that could be interpreted as, "What did you find?" This voice has been attributed to Burke by some experts, despite the family's insistence that he remained asleep in his room throughout the chaos. If accurate, this suggests Burke was not only awake but present in the vicinity of the kitchen or adjacent areas during the call, implying he had been up and about earlier than previously acknowledged. Such presence could indicate that he had been interacting with family members or moving through the house in the pre-dawn hours, potentially overlapping with JonBenét's whereabouts. The call's abrupt end and the hurried tone further fuel speculation that there was more activity in the home than a simple discovery of a note, pointing to a household not entirely at rest as the night transitioned to morning. This audio element, when combined with Burke's later admissions, paints a picture of a night where the children might have shared time together, away from parental supervision. Burke's fascination with his Christmas gift, a Nintendo 64, emerges as a key detail in understanding potential shared activities that evening. He recounted in various interviews how excited he was about this new gaming console, which he had specifically requested and received as his main present. On the afternoon of Christmas Day, he was already engrossed in playing it, and he mentioned staying up late to continue with his toys, which could include setting up or experimenting with the Nintendo in a downstairs room. Given the allure of such a popular device in 1996, featured prominently in magazines like Boy's Life as the toy of the moment, it's reasonable to consider that JonBenét, curious and energetic as young children often are, might have been drawn to join him. Siblings at that age frequently share in each other's playtime, especially with novel items like video games that invite cooperative or observational engagement. Burke's habit of prioritizing the Nintendo is evident from how he quickly grabbed it to take along when leaving the house the next morning with friends, underscoring its importance in his routine and possibly in any late-night sessions. The game's multiplayer potential, even if not fully utilized, could have created opportunities for the two to be in the same space, with JonBenét watching or attempting to participate. Reports from the household dynamics that night also support the idea of the children being active together. JonBenét had a known history of occasional bedwetting incidents, which could have woken her up independently, prompting her to seek comfort or distraction downstairs. In a large home like theirs, with multiple levels and play areas, a child roused in the middle of the night might naturally gravitate toward sounds of activity, such as a brother tinkering with new gadgets. Burke's description of assembling or playing with toys late into the evening aligns with this, as it would have created ambient noise or light that could attract attention. Family accounts, including those from John Ramsey, noted that Burke was putting together a toy before bed, but his own words expand this to include downstairs movements, broadening the window for sibling interaction. The excitement of Christmas, with its unwrapped gifts and lingering holiday energy, often leads to children extending their playtime, resisting sleep in favor of exploration or shared fun. This festive atmosphere could have encouraged both to linger in common areas, perhaps reminiscing about the day's events, or simply enjoying the quiet freedom of the night. Burke's behavior the following morning, as observed by those around him, hints at prior wakefulness that might involve time spent with his sister. He appeared composed and focused on his interests, such as the Nintendo, which he insisted on bringing along despite the unfolding situation. This detachment could stem from a night where routine sibling interactions occurred, normalizing his state of mind. Interviews with friends and associates, like those from the White family, where Burke went shortly after, describe him as engaged in typical boyhood activities, including showing off his new console, suggesting continuity from the previous evening's play. If JonBenét had been part of that, it would explain subtle shifts in his recollections over time, as memories of innocent shared moments might blend with the trauma. The police interrogation in 1998 delved into these details, with Burke providing glimpses of his movements that, when pieced together, suggest more than solitary play. The layout of the Ramsey home itself facilitates the likelihood of the children converging downstairs, with bedrooms on the upper floor and recreational spaces below, including areas stocked with toys and games. It's a natural setup for late-night adventures. Burke's affinity for computer games, as noted by acquaintances like Megan who described him as really into them, positions him as the initiator of such activities, potentially drawing JonBenét in. Her own gifts, like a dollhouse, might have been set aside in favor of joining her brother's more interactive play, a common dynamic in sibling relationships. The absence of immediate parental oversight during those hours, as John and Patsy prepared for an early flight the next day, would have allowed for unstructured time together. Comparisons to similar behaviors in the family, such as half-brother John Andrew playing video games late with friends that same night in another location, reinforce the plausibility of Burke engaging in analogous pursuits at home. Psychological evaluations and expert opinions on children's recall further illuminate these possibilities. Specialists like Phil Miller, from the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, have noted that while kids struggle with reconstructing with everyday events, certain memorable nights stand out. For Burke, Christmas night with its gifts and excitement would qualify, yet his evolving statements suggest layers to his memory that could include interactions with JonBenét. The 6-hour interrogation in 1998 probed these areas, revealing Burke's awareness of the household's rhythm that evening, including when others went to bed. This knowledge implies he was attuned to movements, possibly coordinating or coinciding with his sisters. Burke's pretense of sleep when parents entered his room that morning, as he later admitted, adds nuance to the timeline. He told investigators he was awake during the 9/11 call but chose to feign slumber, which could indicate he had been up earlier and was avoiding questions about his activities. If those activities involved time with JonBenét, this behavior makes sense as a child's way of navigating confusion or reluctance to discuss the night. The police's interest in his credibility stemmed from these discrepancies, highlighting how his presence downstairs could intersect with hers. Overall, these elements weave a tapestry of potential shared moments, grounded in the children's independence that holiday evening. For the order of what everything happened, on that Christmas evening, the family returned home after a festive gathering. John carried JonBenét upstairs to her room, where she was tucked in for the night, while Burke headed to his own space, excited about the new gifts unwrapped earlier that day. Patsy and John soon retired to bed, assuming both children were fast asleep, ready for the early morning flight planned for the next day. The house fell silent, but not for long. Sometime after the parents had drifted off, Burke stirred awake, unable to resist the pull of his brand new Nintendo 64 console. He slipped downstairs quietly, navigating the familiar halls to a lower level where he could play without disturbing anyone. The game lit up the screen with its colorful graphics, drawing him in as he leveled up and explored the virtual worlds. The excitement of Christmas kept him going, turning what should have been bedtime into an extended play session. He might have paused to grab a snack from the kitchen, something simple like fruit and tea, savoring the freedom of the late hour. JonBenét, perhaps woken by a need to use the bathroom, or simply the restlessness of the holiday, climbed out of bed and made her way downstairs. Hearing the faint sounds of the game or seeing the glow from the room, she joined her brother, curious about what he was doing. The two siblings sat together, with JonBenét watching Burke maneuver through the game, maybe asking to take a turn or giggling at the characters on screen. Their shared moment turned playful at first, a secret midnight adventure amid the wrapped presents and holiday decorations scattered around. As the night wore on, a small disagreement arose between them, perhaps over whose turn it was on the console or something as trivial as sharing a bite of food. Burke, frustrated in the way siblings often are, reacted impulsively, grabbing a nearby heavy object like a flashlight and striking JonBenét. The blow was harder than intended, leaving her unresponsive on the floor. Panicked, Burke tried to rouse her, poking at her with a piece from his toy train set, hoping she'd wake up and everything would be fine again. Upstairs, Patsy or John might have heard an unusual noise, dismissing it initially as the kids sneaking a peek at more gifts. But upon checking, one of them discovered the scene downstairs, JonBenét lying still, the air thick with shock, and this will lead us to the second clue to what John and Patsy did next. His second clue is the fact that Patsy claimed that she barely skimmed the ransom note before reacting in panic. She described rushing down the sterile staircase that morning, spotting the papers spread out on a step, and only glancing at the first few lines, enough to grasp that it mentioned her husband and demanded money for their daughter's safe return. Yet, during the frantic 911 call moments later, Patsy conveyed details that went far beyond a cursory read, referencing the threat of harm and the urgency without having the note in hand to double-check. In subsequent interviews, she recalled specific phrases like the heavy warnings and the instruction to be well rested, elements buried deeper in the lengthy document. This remarkable recall raised eyebrows among investigators, who wondered how someone in such distress could internalize intricate wording from a note she insisted she'd hardly absorbed. The discrepancies suggested a familiarity that predated the supposed discovery, prompting questions about whether the note was truly a surprise or something she'd encountered, or even crafted, beforehand. Adding to the intrigue, Patsy's versions of the sequence shifted over time. In one telling, she first noticed the note on the stairs, and then raced upstairs to check the bedroom, only to find it empty, while in another, she peeked into the room first, sensed something amiss, and descended to confirm the horror with the note. These variations in her narrative fueled skepticism, as they implied a story that wasn't fixed from the start. John Ramsey's recollections about the note introduced their own layers of inconsistency, particularly regarding when and how he engaged with it. He maintained that after Patsy's scream alerted him, he knelt down to read the entire 3-page missive carefully, absorbing every detail before they proceeded to call authorities. However, his initial statements to police described a more hurried scan, similar to Patsy's, where he focused mainly on the demand for $118,000, a sum that eerily matched his recent work bonus, a fact only close insiders would know. In later discussions, John emphasized certain elements, like the reference to a foreign faction, as evidence of an outside threat, yet he couldn't explain why the note addressed him primarily as Maitre Ramsey, in a way that seemed to sideline Patsy entirely. This selective emphasis clashed with Patsy's accounts, where she highlighted different threats, creating a disjointed picture of what the couple prioritized from the same document. Investigators noted that John's business acumen might have influenced his focus on the financial aspect, but the couple's differing recollections about who handled the note first, John claiming he spread it out on the floor for a better look, while Patsy said it was already laid out, added to the sense that their stories weren't fully aligned. Moreover, John's insistence that the note's professional tone reflected a sophisticated kidnapper contradicted Patsy's emotional portrayal of it as a crude, terrifying scrawl, highlighting how their interpretations diverged even on its basic style. Beyond the reading and recall, the physical origins of the note presented stark contradictions in the Ramseys' explanations. Both Patsy and John denied recognizing the notepad from which the pages were torn, insisting it must have been brought in by an intruder, yet forensic examination revealed it came from Patsy's own writing pad kept in the kitchen, complete with a partial draft on an earlier sheet that mirrored the note's opening. Patsy, when confronted, vaguely recalled owning similar pads but claimed no memory of using that specific one recently, a response that clashed with household staff reports of her frequent note-taking habits. John echoed this amnesia, suggesting the pen used, also from their home, could have been pilfered, but he couldn't account for why an outsider would risk composing such a lengthy message on site rather than preparing it in advance. This on-the-spot creation, estimated to take over 20 minutes, didn't align with the couple's timeline of a swift abduction, Patsy speculated the intruder lingered undetected, while John proposed a more calculated entry. But neither could reconcile why the note included personal touches like the exact bonus amount, which John admitted was confidential to family and close associates. The handwriting analysis further muddied their denials, as experts pointed to similarities in letter formations, such as the distinctive and crossings that matched Patsy's samples, though the Ramseys dismissed these as coincidental, arguing hired analysts cleared her. The couple's actions immediately after discovering the note also bred significant inconsistencies with what the document explicitly demanded. The note sternly warned against contacting police or anyone else, threatening dire consequences if disobeyed, yet Patsy dialed 911 almost instantly, a move she later justified as instinctive panic overriding the instructions. John supported this, saying the shock made compliance impossible, but in interviews, he revealed they'd discussed the note's directives briefly before the call, including the odd specificity of delivering the money in a brown paper bag. This deliberation contradicted Patsy's portrayal of blind, so she claimed no time to process the threats fully, yet both invited friends over shortly after, directly violating the note's isolation orders. John rationalized this as needing support, but the discrepancy lay in their selective adherence, ignoring the no police rule while later, as proof of a real kidnapping plot. Patsy, in one statement, expressed fear of surveillance as mentioned in the note, yet proceeded to rally a group at the house, actions that John downplayed as necessary for emotional survival. These choices painted a picture of a couple who treated the note's commands inconsistently, raising doubts about whether they truly believed it was from a genuine abductor or if it served another purpose. The absence of fingerprints on the note, except for Patsy's from handling it that morning, added another layer. John claimed he barely touched it, yet his detailed knowledge implied closer inspection, conflicting with forensic findings. The note's length and detail prompted inconsistencies in the Ramseys' theories about the perpetrator. Patsy argued it proved a deranged individual's obsession, given its verbosity, but John countered that it indicated a team effort, citing the plural pronouns. This disagreement persisted in their public statements. Patsy leaned toward a lone stalker familiar with their lives, while John favored a disgruntled employee or rival. Yet neither could square why an intruder would risk composing it inside the home, rather than bringing a pre-written demand. Patsy's denial of any practice drafts clashed with the discovery of indented impressions on the pad, suggesting revisions that mirrored her meticulous nature. John dismissed these as unrelated scribbles, but the couple's unified front cracked when Patsy admitted to writing samples under duress, contrasting John's confidence in her innocence based on expert opinions they commissioned. These debates over the note's intent and execution highlighted how their explanations often circled back to defend against implications of involvement, even as details shifted. For Patsy's inconsistent statement, speculation about who penned the ransom note has long centered on Patsy Ramsey, with handwriting experts from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation playing a pivotal role in shaping that view. Chet Ubowski, a key analyst at the CBI, examined multiple samples from Patsy and concluded that her writing showed strong indications of matching the note's script, noting consistencies in 24 out of 26 letters of the alphabet. This analysis highlighted unique quirks which aligned closely with Patsy's natural style, despite apparent attempts in the note to disguise the handwriting through altered slant and pressure. Ubowski's report emphasized that while the results weren't definitive enough for a courtroom certainty, the probability pointed heavily toward Patsy as the author, ruling out John entirely based on his samples. Other experts echoed this, with some testifying before a grand jury that the note's verbose, dramatic phrasing bore hallmarks of Patsy's expressive writing from personal letters and journals. The police leaned on this forensic evidence early on, viewing it as the most damaging link to an inside job, especially since the notepad and pen used originated from the family's kitchen. Indentations on the pad revealed a partial draft starting with Mr. and Mrs., suggesting revisions that fit Patsy's meticulous habits. Advancements in technology have revisited this analysis, offering new layers to the debate over authorship. Modern forensic tools, including computer-assisted handwriting comparison software, have been applied retrospectively to the case, quantifying stroke patterns and pressure variations with statistical models. In one such evaluation, algorithms trained on vast databases of disguised writing detected efforts to obscure the script, such as inconsistent letter sizes and forced loops, which still clustered closely with Patsy's examples. These digital methods, used by agencies like the FBI in similar investigations, provide probabilistic scores, often above 90% likelihood in controlled tests, that bolster the original CBI findings. More recently, AI-driven linguistic analysis has dissected the note's mixed gender traits, identifying feminine elements like nurturing advice to be rested, alongside masculine commands, suggesting a female writer attempting an authoritative tone. AI-style models, when prompted, highlight inconsistencies like sarcastic asides, "Don't try to grow a brain," as more conversational and indirect, traits statistically more common in women's writing, further implicating Patsy as the primary scribe. While Patsy emerges as the likely writer based on these analyses, questions about direction point toward John Ramsey as a potential orchestrator of the content. Police investigators, including former Boulder detective Steve Thomas, argued that the note's specifics, demanding exactly 118,000, matching John's recent bonus, reflected insider knowledge that John would have supplied, as it was a figure tied to his business dealings and unknown to outsiders. The notes focus on addressing Mr. Ramsey, predominantly, with threats centered on his family and assets, suggests input from someone positioning himself as the central target, aligning with John's strategic mindset from his executive background. Handwriting experts noted that while Patsy's script dominated, the structured, business-like phrasing echoed John's professional correspondence, implying he dictated key elements to create a facade of an external threat. Technological probes into the note's composition reinforce this collaborative angle. Forensic software analyzing linguistic patterns detects shifts in style, from cold, imperative sentences to softer, persuasive ones, that could indicate multiple influences, with AI models proposing a more than one author scenario where one person writes under guidance. In recent revaluations, machine learning algorithms trained on movie scripts identified borrowed phrases from films like Dirty Harry and Speed, genres John admitted familiarity with, suggesting he contributed thematic ideas to mask the note's true origins. Police evidence from the scene, such as the undisturbed pad and the notes on site creation, supports the idea of hurried collaboration, with John's calmer demeanor that morning contrasting Patsy's hysteria, hinting at his role in overseeing the staging. Counterarguments have surfaced through alternative suspects, but police and tech-based scrutiny often circles back to the Ramseys. For instance, a 2023 forensic handwriting overlay linked convicted pedophile Gary Oliva to the note, citing similarities in erratic loops and spacing. However, this analysis, using digital enhancement tools, faced criticism for overlooking the CBI's foundational exclusions of outsiders, with algorithms showing lower match probabilities compared to Patsy's samples. Investigators like those from the Boulder PD maintained that the note's intimate details, referencing John's Southern common sense, required direction from within the household, likely John steering Patsy to incorporate personal flourishes. Ongoing technological applications continue to dissect the note's authorship dynamics. Advanced neural networks, similar to those in Frack's letter investigations, model disguise techniques by simulating variations in Patsy's writing, achieving high confidence in her as the executor under potential oversight. These tools quantify the improbability of an intruder composing such a lengthy, error-free document on unfamiliar materials, pointing to a directed effort where John provided the framework, financial specifics and tactical warnings, while Patsy handled the physical writing, her emotional slips evident in the note's verbose pleas. The third clue lies in the Ramseys' search process for their daughter, where they exhibited many behaviors unlike typical parents. Patsy described hurrying up the stairs after spotting the papers on a step, pushing open the bedroom door, and seeing an empty bed without stepping inside or calling out her name. In her accounts, she immediately turned to alert John, screaming for him instead of shouting for the child, as if expecting no response from the room. This absence of vocal urgency stood out, since most parents in a panic would instinctively yell the child's name repeatedly, hoping for a hidden reply or to confirm she wasn't tucked away somewhere nearby. Patsy's focus shifted quickly to dialing emergency services, bypassing any audible pleas that might echo through the halls, a detail that investigators later flagged as oddly detached for someone convinced of a kidnapping. John's involvement in the initial sweep of the house followed a similar pattern, with no mention in his statements of calling out as he checked other rooms. He recounted rushing to the bedroom after Patsy's cry, glancing around briefly, then heading downstairs to examine the note more closely without verbalizing any search for the girl. Even as he moved through common areas like the kitchen or living spaces, there was no record or recollection of him shouting her name, a natural reflex to draw out a scared child possibly hiding. This silence persisted despite the family's large home, where sound could carry, making it even more peculiar that neither parent tried to summon her vocally before involving outsiders. Friends who arrived soon after noted the couple's subdued demeanor, with Patsy remaining upstairs in distress, but not audibly beckoning, and John coordinating arrivals rather than leading a frantic hunt with calls. The lack of naming during this critical window raised experts analyzing parental reactions in missing child cases. Typically, a mother or father would fill the air with desperate repetitions of the child's name, blending hope with fear, yet Patsy's haste led stray the phone without that emotional outburst. John's methodical approach, including a claimed early check of the basement where he saw nothing unusual, included no verbal elements, as if the act was performative rather than genuine. This quiet search contrasted sharply with standard behavior, where parents often describe endless calling as part of their immediate response, underscoring a potential awareness that no answer would come. Even as police arrived and the scene grew chaotic, the Ramseys didn't initiate group calls or direct officers to shout her name, further emphasizing the anomaly in their conduct. Patsy's later interviews reinforced this pattern, where she admitted the search was brief and contained, without elaborating on any vocal efforts. John's versions evolved slightly over time, but consistently omitted any shouting, focusing instead on physical checks that yielded nothing until much later. This restraint, devoid of the raw, instinctive cries expected in such terror, suggested a foreknowledge that rendered calling pointless, a point debated in forensic psychology reviews of the case. The couple's actions, from the stairwell discovery to the first arrivals, painted a picture of controlled response rather than unbridled parental alarm, with silence speaking volumes about what might have been known. Beyond the initial moments, Patsy, after her quick glance into the bedroom, didn't venture further into potential hiding spots like closets or under the bed, nor did she extend her to adjacent areas such as the playroom or bathrooms on that floor. Instead, she descended the stairs to summon help, her actions more focused on external assistance than a thorough internal sweep. John, upon joining her, conducted what he described as a brief through of nearby rooms, peering into spaces like the living room and kitchen, but he skipped over less obvious locations such as the garage or outdoor access points, places where a frightened child might conceivably seek refuge. This selective approach raised questions, as typical parental instinct in such crises involves turning the house upside down, opening every door and drawer, yet their movements stayed confined to high-traffic areas, almost as if anticipating the futility of a deeper probe. Even as the gravity of the note's warning sank in, with its threats of constant surveillance and dire consequences for involving authorities, the couple proceeded to invite friends over, effectively turning the home into a gathering spot rather than preserving it as a potential clue-filled sanctuary for a solo, desperate hunt. This invitation to outsiders further amplified the oddity of their behavior, directly contradicting the note's explicit instructions to avoid contact with anyone, including law enforcement or even stray dogs, under penalty of harm to the child. Patsy dialed emergency services almost immediately, a move that defied the document's stern admonitions, and John followed suit by phoning close acquaintances like Fleet White and others, who arrived within minutes to offer support. With the house soon filled with additional people, friends consoling Patsy upstairs and milling about downstairs, the scene became contaminated, footprints and touches obscuring any potential evidence, all while the Ramseys didn't lead a coordinated, vocal effort to calm every nook. Fleet White later recounted joining John in a cursory look around, but even then, key areas like the wine cellar in the basement went unexamined initially, despite being a logical hiding or entry point. Patsy's role remained passive, she stayed on the upper level, wrapped in grief and prayer, without descending to direct or participate in the expanding search, a detachment that struck observers as inconsistent with a mother's raw drive to locate her missing daughter. John's temporary disappearance for about an hour mid-morning, during which his whereabouts weren't clearly accounted for, added another layer of peculiarity, as it coincided with a time when intensified searching might have been expected, perhaps using that interval for private reflection or other unexplained activities. The timeline of events introduced several inconsistencies that compounded the strangeness of the search. Patsy recalled waking around 5:30 a.m. to prepare for their planned trip, descending the stairs and spotting the note spread across a step. Yet her description of reading only the opening lines before reacting didn't align with the full 3-page length, requiring more time for comprehension. She claimed to have rushed upstairs immediately after, but John's account varied slightly, suggesting he heard her cries and met her partway, with no clear synchronization on whether he was already awake or roused from sleep. His initial statements placed him getting up closer to 6 a.m., creating a discrepancy in how long Patsy might have been alone with the note before alerting him. The call to emergency services came swiftly at 5:52 a.m., but the couple's later retelling shifted on the exact sequence, Patsy sometimes emphasizing a frantic check of the bedroom first, while John focused on his downstairs reading of the full note, a task that would take several minutes yet fit into a compressed window before phoning friends. John's early basement check around 7 a.m., where he reportedly saw nothing amiss through a partially open door, clashed with his discovery of JonBenét there hours later at 1 p.m., after a prompt from Fleet White to re-examine overlooked spots. This raised doubts about the thoroughness of that first glance and whether the timeline masked prior knowledge. Further timeline conflicts emerged in their recollections of the previous evening's events leading into the morning. Patsy described the family ring from a holiday gathering, with the child asleep in the car, and carried upstairs without changing clothes. But John's versions occasionally adjusted the bedtime routine, sometimes including reading a story, which didn't match initial police notes. Burke's involvement added another mismatch. The parents insisted he slept through the chaos, yet enhanced audio from the emergency call captured what sounded like his voice in the background, implying he was awake earlier than claimed, around the 5:52 a.m. mark. This audio anomaly, analyzed by experts, suggested the family dynamic wasn't as isolated as portrayed, with potential interactions before the official search began. The couple's accounts of when friends arrived and when police took over also varied, with John recalling a more structured handover, while Patsy emphasized emotional overwhelm, creating gaps in the sequence that investigators probe for signs of rehearsal or omission. These temporal inconsistencies, like the unexplained hour John was unaccounted for, fueled speculation that the search narrative was constructed to fit a predetermined story rather than reflecting spontaneous panic. Debates surrounding the couple's clothing that morning intensified scrutiny of their actions. Patsy appeared in the same red sweater and black pants from the previous evening's party, complete with makeup that looked untouched from the night before, prompting questions about whether she had truly gone to bed or spent the hours in a state of alertness. She explained it as grabbing whatever was handy in the rush, but critics pointed out that her routine typically involved changing into nightwear, suggesting the outfit indicated no sleep or a need to maintain appearances for an anticipated discovery. John, in contrast, was dressed in fresh casual attire, a striped shirt and khakis. When authorities arrived, a change that seemed deliberate compared to Patsy's continuity, raising theories about him having time to compose himself or remove any incriminating traces. This disparity sparked arguments and analyses, with some viewing Patsy's unchanged look as evidence of an all-night staging effort, while John's quick refresh implied coordination to present a united front. The clothing debate extended to practicalities. If truly roused from sleep, disheveled pajamas would be expected, yet their composed presentations clashed with the chaos of a sudden crisis, adding to the perception that the search was more performative than genuine. Patsy's ensemble, in particular, became a focal point in reconstructions, as photos from the party confirmed the match, and her admission of not washing off makeup the night prior didn't fully address why she wouldn't change for bed. John's attire shift, meanwhile, aligned with his business-like demeanor during the morning, coordinating calls and movements without the rumpled signs of abrupt awakening. These elements, debated in forums and documentaries, underscored how the couple's physical state that day didn't sync with a narrative of shocked parents scrambling in the dark, instead hinting at premeditated responses amid the unfolding events. The unchanged clothes on Patsy, combined with John's fresh ones, fed into broader suspicions about the timeline's authenticity, as if the night had been spent in activity rather than rest. From the strange behavior of John and Patsy, we can imagine the events that happened after Christmas Eve that John and Patsy did to cover up what happened that night. Let's look back again. In the pre-dawn hours following the Christmas night tragedy, Patsy and John reportedly sprang into action to transform the scene from an accidental family mishap into a calculated kidnapping narrative. Patsy, still in her red sweater and black pants from the evening's festivities, descended the spiral staircase around 5:30 am, strategically placing the 3-page ransom note on a step where it would be discovered during her routine preparations for the family's planned trip. The note, composed on her own kitchen notepad with a pen from the home, demanded exactly $118,000, matching John's recent bonus, and incorporated dramatic phrases lifted from movies like Dirty Harry and Speed, elements that handwriting experts later linked to Patsy's style through over 30 similarities in letter formations. John, having changed into fresh khakis and a striped shirt, joined her in finalizing details, possibly directing the inclusion of business-like threats such as countermeasures, to lend an air of professional criminality, diverting attention from any internal conflict. Together, they ensured the basement wine cellar housed JonBenét, relocated from its original spot upstairs or in the kitchen area, wrapped in a white blanket from the dryer and secured with duct tape over the mouth, postmortem additions to simulate a violent abduction. The makeshift device, fashioned from household cord and a broken paintbrush handle from Patsy's art supplies, was tightened around the neck to obscure the initial head trauma, a wound consistent with a blunt force strike perhaps from a flashlight during a sibling squabble over snacks or toys. By 5:52 am, Patsy initiated the next layer of the cover by dialing emergency services, her voice conveying a mix of hysteria and scripted detail as she reported a kidnapping, quoting threats from the note without needing to reference it fully, suggesting prior rehearsal. The call's background audio, later enhanced by experts, captured what sounded like a young boy's voice asking, "What did you find?" Attributed to Burke in the kitchen, contradicting later claims that he slept through everything, implying the parents coached him to feign slumber and shielded him from immediate questioning. John, meanwhile, conducted a superficial sweep of upstairs rooms, peering into the bedroom and adjacent areas without calling out or checking hidden nooks like closets. His actions more performative than probing, as if aware no response would come. He then examined the note downstairs, spreading it on the floor for a supposed careful read, but this handling risked contamination, aligning with efforts to integrate it seamlessly into the intruder's story. Instead of isolating the home as the note warned against any contact under threat of harm, John phoned close friends like Fleet and Priscilla White around 6 a.m., inviting them over to provide emotional support and unwitting witnesses, further muddying the scene with additional footprints and touches that could obscure forensic traces. As the first officer, Rick French, arrived shortly after 6 a.m., the Ramseys maintained composure amid the growing chaos, Patsy retreating upstairs to a bedroom where she wept and prayed with arriving friends, her passive role avoiding active participation in any expanded search that might prematurely reveal JonBenét. John guided the officer through a cursory tour, pointing out the note but steering clear of the basement's far corner, claiming an early 7 a.m. glance there showed nothing amiss, a statement that clashed with his later discovery, suggesting intentional delay. Around 7 a.m., they arranged for Burke to be whisked away to the Whites' home. Bundled with his new Nintendo console, under the pretense he had slept soundly, this removal protected him from police inquiries, with instructions to pretend ignorance, as evidenced by his later interviews where he admitted sneaking downstairs, but omitted key details. Patsy's unchanged outfit and full makeup from the night before fueled suspicions of an all-nighter spent staging, while John's fresh clothes implied time for personal adjustments amid the orchestration, both elements pointing to a coordinated effort to present a unified front of shocked innocence. By mid-morning, with more officers and friends filling the house, John Fernie, Barbara Fernie, and others, the scene became increasingly contaminated, a byproduct that served to complicate investigations without direct interference from the parents. John's unexplained absence for about an hour around 10 a.m. raised eyebrows, during which he might have revisited the basement to ensure the setup held or to compose himself for the impending reveal. Patsy, meanwhile, remained sequestered upstairs, her interactions limited to consoling gestures rather than demanding updates on search progress, a detachment that contrasted with typical parental frenzy. Around 1 p.m., prompted by Fleet White to recheck overlooked areas, John headed directly to the wine cellar, finding JonBenét and swiftly removing the duct tape from her mouth before carrying her upstairs in the blanket, a move that transferred his fibers and DNA to the scene, interpreted as deliberate to blend traces and justify handling. He laid her on the living room floor, where Patsy dramatically collapsed over her, but neither attempted CPR or revival efforts, behaviors suggesting prior acceptance of the outcome. In the immediate aftermath, as detectives processed the scene, the Ramseys emphasized the intruder theory in initial statements, John providing the note and describing his limited morning searches without admitting to any vocal calls or exhaustive efforts that might contradict the timeline. They delayed clothing submission for forensic testing until months later in 1998, items potentially laundered to remove incriminating evidence like fibers or stains linking to the night's events. Over the following days, they retained high-profile lawyers and private investigators to propagate alternative suspects, refusing formal interviews until April 1997 and conditioning them on terms that limited probing questions. Their relocation to Atlanta by mid-1997 further distanced them from bolder scrutiny, while public relations campaigns, including their 2000 book, The Death of Innocence, reframed the narrative to absolve family involvement, downplaying inconsistencies like the unchanged clothes or silent searches. Legal maneuvers, such as suing media outlets in 2016 for suggesting Burke's role and settling in 2019, continued the deflection, ensuring the cover endured amid ongoing debates. However, John and Patsy's plan clearly had too many loopholes, and the police noticed and took specific investigative actions. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, officers on the scene quickly moved to secure the area, cordoning off key rooms like the bedroom to prevent further contamination, while forensics teams began collecting items such as the ransom note, the device used in the incident, and various household objects that might hold traces. They documented the layout meticulously, photographing every angle of the basement wine cellar, where JonBenét was found, noting the blanket and other materials that appeared staged. Samples of blood, hair, and fingerprints were taken from the parents and brother on site to establish baselines for comparison, with initial interviews conducted that evening to capture fresh recollections of the previous night's events. These early steps aimed to preserve the integrity of the evidence, though the presence of friends invited by the family had already introduced potential complications, prompting detectives to expand their canvas of witnesses right away. By the next day, The investigation intensified with a focus on the young brother, who was questioned at a friend's home to gather details about family routines and any unusual occurrences leading up to the discovery. Officers revisited the residence to search for signs of entry or exit points, methodically checking windows, doors, and the garage for forced marks or footprints, while expanding the suspect list to include neighbors, former employees, and acquaintances. The ransom note was sent for immediate analysis at the state lab, where experts began comparing its phrasing and handwriting to known samples, a process that would reveal inconsistencies over time. Autopsy procedures were prioritized, with pathologists examining JonBenét for any additional clues that could timeline the events or identify materials used, leading to early hypotheses about the sequence of actions. Media briefings were held to appeal for public tips, establishing a hotline that fielded hundreds of calls in the first week, each vetted for credibility as the department allocated resources to follow up on leads ranging from suspicious vehicles to anonymous letters. As the new year began, the team delved deeper into forensic science, submitting DNA from undergarments and other items to federal databases for matches, a step that initially yielded no hits but set the stage for long-term comparisons. Handwriting samples were requested multiple times from Patsy, including left-handed attempts to probe for disguises in the note's script, with analysts noting similarities in letter shapes and flourishes. The department hired additional specialists, including a retired profiler, to review behavioral patterns and reconstruct the night's timeline, cross-referencing family statements against physical evidence like the pineapple bowl and its fingerprints. Interviews with extended family and party attendees from Christmas Day were scheduled, aiming to verify alibis and uncover any overlooked tensions. A command post was established to coordinate the growing file of over 1,000 potential persons of interest, with task forces assigned to background checks and surveillance on select individuals. By mid-February, internal audits revealed mishandled items, prompting a review of chain of custody protocols to ensure no further losses, though this setback delayed some lab results. Spring brought formal interrogations, with John and Patsy questioned separately in April under controlled conditions, their responses scrutinized for shifts in details about the morning's search and discovery. The brothers' extended session in June provided more context on sibling dynamics, with psychologists consulted to interpret child recollections. As summer turned to fall, a grand jury was convened in September, impaneled to hear testimony from over 100 witnesses, including experts on the note's linguistics and the device's construction, deliberating for more than a year on potential charges. The grand jury's work culminated in recommendations by October of the following year. Though the district attorney declined to prosecute, citing evidentiary gaps, this didn't halt the probe, as officers continued retesting items with emerging technologies. In the early 2000s, touch DNA analysis from clothing became a breakthrough, identifying an unknown male profile that excluded family members, shifting some focus outward while still pursuing familial angles. The case was reopened multiple times, with a 2009 handover back to police from the prosecutor's office leading to fresh reviews of old evidence. A multidisciplinary committee in 10 brought in state and federal experts to apply advanced forensics, re-examining fibers and tapes for matches. Unsealing of grand jury documents in 2013 revealed the panel's inclination toward charges like accessory roles, sparking renewed media scrutiny and public calls for transparency. By 2016, new genetic testing on undergarments suggested multiple contributors, prompting submissions to updated databases for broader searches. The formation of a cold case team in recent years, collaborating with federal agencies, has emphasized retesting with cutting-edge methods, including genealogical databases to trace the unidentified DNA. Public appeals for tips have been relaunched, with hotlines reactivated and online portals for submissions, What stood out wasn't only the business success or the grand house, it was the odd fractures that surfaced when pressure mounted. Colleagues described John as disciplined, even calculating. But when scrutiny arrived, his reactions veered from composed to strangely defensive. Investigators noticed his instinct was to close ranks, limit information, protect image first, transparency second. That behavior wasn't proof of guilt, but it was enough to raise suspicion. Financially, the picture wasn't as spotless as the glossy exterior suggested. While access graphics soared, corporate transitions meant constant evaluation. Contracts shifted, competition pushed harder, and carried the weight of keeping momentum alive. At the same time, whispers about neighborhood crime created another layer of insecurity. More than 100 break-ins reported nearby, too many to dismiss as coincidence. It painted a backdrop of unease, as if the Ramsey household, despite its walls and alarms, sat inside a storm of volatility. Psychologically, that tension left marks. John had lived for decades in environments where status and control mattered more than vulnerability. It trained him to suppress weakness, to manage perception. But when tragedy hit, that same training backfired. Instead of raw grief, many saw distance. Instead of chaos, they saw careful calculation. To some, it felt unnatural, a performance polished by years of corporate survival. And that is where the cracks deepen. Was John Ramsey a man under siege by forces outside his control, corporate rivalries, crime in his community, media frenzy, or was the polished executive image a shield for something darker? The unsettling truth is that before the case ever made headlines, the seeds of suspicion had already been planted in how he lived, how he worked, and how he reacted when the mask slipped. Before the case exploded into headlines, John Ramsey carried the reputation of a reserved man, someone who preferred the background to the spotlight. Friends described him as introverted, sometimes distant, a personality shaped more by numbers and boardrooms than by social gatherings. To outsiders, that quietness felt harmless. To critics, it later became suspicious, an opening for speculation that his silence concealed something far more troubling. After the tragedy, a swirl of online theories began to recast his private life in darker tones. Unproven allegations suggested he might have been involved in inappropriate behavior within his own household. These claims never materialized into evidence, never reached a courtroom, yet they gained traction in forums and late-night discussions. The fuel for such claims came not from hard proof but from fragments of subtle behaviors, strange details in police reports, and above all, the child's medical history. JonBenét's episodes of bedwetting became a focal point for theorists. In ordinary families, it might be dismissed as developmental, a common stress response in children. But in the crucible of a murder investigation, it became so much a potential red flag, reinterpreted through the harsh lens of suspicion. Was it simply childhood behavior, or a sign of deeper trauma? The answer never crystallized, and the absence of clarity only amplified conspiracy. Psychologically, this tension shows the way silence and ambiguity can breed doubt. John's lack of public vulnerability and his tendency to appear controlled fed a narrative that he was not grieving but hiding. Critics seized on every flat expression, every careful word. What might have been nothing more than shock became the foundation of entire theories about sensitive behavior to JonBenét in secrecy. No court confirmed these allegations. Still, the shadow lingers. In true crime circles, the absence of evidence doesn't always kill suspicion. It often keeps it alive, whispering beneath the surface. John Ramsey's first marriage to Lucinda Pash produced 3 children, anchoring in what appeared to be an ordinary American household. From the outside, it carried the hallmarks of stability: vacations, schools, the slow climb of a career. One of those children, John Andrew, later recalled the atmosphere as normal, a word meant to counter the darkness that followed. Yet beneath the surface, normal wasn't as simple as it sounded. Families rarely reveal the full weight of their private tensions until years later, when hindsight reshapes memories. Reports surfaced that health issues shadowed parts of the household, though specifics stayed vague. Whether minor ailments or more complex struggles, they added stress into a family already dealing with a father consumed by work. Corporate schedules, frequent travel, and ambition left gaps in presence. In that space, unspoken resentments and subtle conflicts had room to grow. Behavioral strains also entered the conversation. Accounts suggested there were patterns of small frictions between siblings, disagreements about discipline, and questions over parental style. Nothing explosive enough to trigger scandal. No public collapse of reputation. But enough to hint at pressure points lying dormant. In retrospect, these details took on heavier meaning, as if seeds of instability were planted long before December 1996. This is the paradox of family present ordinary, even enviable, yet carrying unresolved cracks. When tragedy later struck, critics turned backward, searching these early years for signs. Every health concern, every behavioral note became a possible clue. Were these just natural hardships of a blended family, or the first shadows of a story that would one day become infamous? At the time, there was no scandal, no headlines. But the silence of those early tensions left room for speculation, and speculation, once ignited, rarely burns out. Allegations of sensitive behavior to JonBenét emerged not from direct testimony but from interpretations layered onto medical reports and behavioral notes. Experts reviewing the autopsy pointed to possible signs of prior trauma, fueling speculation that JonBenét may have endured inappropriate contact before her death. These conclusions were not unanimous. Other pathologists argued the findings could be explained by postmortem changes or unrelated medical conditions. Still, the suggestion was enough to stain John Ramsey's name in the court of public opinion. For years, he firmly denied every accusation. His defense rested heavily on science, and in 2008 DNA testing appeared to clear him. Samples taken from the child's clothing excluded immediate family members, pointing instead to an unidentified male profile. This exoneration became his shield, the technical proof that he was not the abuser some had painted him to be. Yet, as often happens in high-profile cases, absence of evidence did not silence suspicion. Online communities seized on the ambiguity. Platforms social built on endless debate. recycled theories suggesting John himself could have been responsible. They dissected his television interviews, his flat effect, his careful wording. Every pause became evidence, every smile framed as sinister. For believers, DNA only ruled out direct involvement in that single moment. It did not erase the possibility of a hidden history. What's striking is the psychological gap between perception and proof. Science cleared him, but culture kept him guilty in whispers. This is where conspiracy thrives, in the vacuum left by contradictions, in the refusal to accept that something so horrific could remain unsolved without family involvement. In truth, no verified record ties John Ramsey to prior sensitive behavior to JonBenét. Yet suspicion clings to him, not because of what was proven, but because of what could never be disproven. The setting surrounding the Ramsey household was far from the idyllic picture their wealth projected. Boulder, often portrayed as a haven for affluence and academic culture, carried its own shadows. Reports documented more than 100 break-ins and offenses in the neighborhood over a relatively short period. These incidents did not directly implicate John Ramsey, but they painted the backdrop of insecurity against which his family lived. In hindsight, this context allowed conspiracy theories to thrive. Critics argued that such a climate made intruder theories plausible, while others insisted the family itself remained the more likely source of danger. Financially, John was navigating a corporate world in transition. Access Graphics, the company he had steered to considerable success, was eventually sold to Lockheed Martin. While the deal reflected growth, it also introduced instability. Large-scale corporate acquisitions often bring winners and losers. Executives may secure payouts, but restructuring and shifts in valuation can erase personal stakes. For John, whispers of potential financial loss circulated, though nothing him to corruption or fraudulent dealings. Still, the timing of the company's transition coinciding with turmoil in his private life gave critics material to question whether stress, money, and pressure played hidden roles. The psychological weight of these dual pressures living in a community marked by crime and managing corporate upheaval should not be underestimated. Executives accustomed to control often struggle when external factors erode that stability. For John, the appearance of calm may have been less about guilt and more about survival instinct. A businessman's training to remain steady when circumstances spun beyond his reach. No evidence proves his finances drove desperation, nor that neighborhood crime touched his household directly. Yet both elements add texture to his story, revealing that even before the tragedy, the Ramseys lived in an environment more fragile than their perfect facade suggested. Before the night that changed everything, John Ramsey and Fleet White were considered close friends. They moved in the same social circles, affluent families with ties in Boulder's upper class. White was even present at the Ramsey home in the hours after the tragedy, one of the very few outsiders to witness the scene firsthand. That level of access implied trust, the kind that usually comes only after as of personal connection. Yet, as time passed, the relationship fractured in ways that hinted at deeper tensions. By 2000, when John testified under oath, he referred to Fleet's behavior as strange. He didn't specify every detail, but the phrasing alone suggested suspicion. Friendships don't collapse overnight, they erode under pressure, often revealing fault lines that had been there long before. The public only saw the fallout, but the roots likely stretched further back. Some analysts have speculated that hidden disagreements may have simmered over values, over how each man handled the intense spotlight, or even over personal trust within their families. White's later vocal criticism of the investigation and his distance from the Ramseys amplified those suspicions. The shift from ally to adversary marked a turning point. It wasn't just the police who doubted John, but now one of his closest friends seemed to as well. Psychologically, this rift mattered. In high-stakes cases, social validation is everything. When a friend speaks of you in cautious or critical terms, the perception of innocence becomes harder to defend. John's description of Fleet as odd may have been defensive, an attempt to redirect suspicion outward, or it may have been genuine, reflecting fractures he had long noticed but never voiced. Either way, the broken friendship became another shadow in the Ramsey story, a reminder that behind the glossy surface, trust was fragile, and alliances could turn into liabilities overnight. Before he was known as a businessman or the father at the center of one of America's most haunting cases, John Ramsey wore a uniform. He served in the U.S. Navy, a period of his life marked by discipline, structure, and a reputation free of controversy. By all official accounts, his military service was unblemished. No formal complaints, no scandals. For many, that history should have stood as a pillar of credibility. Yet in the years after JonBenét's death, even this seemingly solid part of his biography became fuel for speculation. Conspiracy theorists seized on the Navy connection, suggesting that his ties to military culture equipped him with the skills to cover tracks, manage crises, and control narratives. The logic was thin. Service in the armed forces does not automatically imply a talent for deception, but in the true crime arena, where every detail becomes suspect, it was enough to take root. Online forums framed him as a man capable of compartmentalization, someone trained to maintain composure under stress, someone who could theoretically hide secrets behind a disciplined exterior. Education also played into this narrative. Ramsey held degrees in engineering and business, further evidence of a mind attuned to detail and systems. Admirers saw these accomplishments as proof of competence and ambition. Detractors reframed them as qualities that could allow him to manipulate perception, to construct an alibi with precision, or to manage a cover story like a project plan. The same traits that helped him succeed in business were reinterpreted as tools for concealment. No court ever connected his military or educational background to wrongdoing.